What is the line between jealousy and anger? Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Aaron Ford, and we're here for another video, which will be in two separate playlists here on the channel. Three separate playlists here on the channel. Number one, the short story discussion playlist. Number two, a short story by short story or part by part read along of Let Me Tell You by Shirley Jackson. And third, the Shirley Jackson playlist here on the channel, a playlist dedicated strictly to Shirley Jackson herself. Now, the short story in question today is known as Still Life with Teapots and Students. It is the second short story in Let Me Tell You. We will have a So What Happened recap, a literary criticism section, and a writer's corner for this short story where we talk about the things that we can learn from this short story as writers ourselves. So, what happened? Louise is speaking to her husband Lionel's students, Joan and Debbie. Lionel's students are well-to-do, very prim, very proper, or so it seems. Louise asks them if they'll have a good summer. Then she asks them if they'll get any writing in. Then she asks them if they want more tea. Then she asks Joan if she's still making passes at her husband. Joan starts to deny it, and Louise counters by saying they'd already be having the talk if she were more like Ellen Thorndike. And all of them have a good laugh. To about this point in the short story, I think everyone is kind of wondering just what is going on. But it turns out there is a group of college girls trying to poach their professors. How do we get to that point? How do we come to that conclusion when it's not explicitly said in the text? It kind of is. If you have the same text that I have on page 19, this is as that conversation is happening. Well, we've talked about it a lot, Debbie said. Or she's talking about how the wives become jealous. Well, we've talked about it a lot, Debbie said seriously. We've decided among the students that none of you could see your husbands go off to an office every day without worrying about his secretary. I mean, wives just are jealous, aren't they? We've talked about it a lot. You guys are jealous. It seems there is maybe a bounty on professors or something of the sort. Maybe they are just going big game hunting, as it were. Louise is confronting the girl who is after her husband, but summer is coming up and the girls will be gone. Louise is trying to make sure she isn't going out to. So basically, Louise knows that the time is limited. So I'm just making sure that despite the fact that you are flirting with my husband, these are your last few opportunities. There will be no foul play, will there? That's kind of what's going on in this short story. The girls assure her that it wasn't serious to them as Louise shepherds them out the door, and Louise tells them that Lionel won't be teaching anymore, and we leave the short story with this. She went out into the kitchen and made herself a drink. So I did it, she told herself defiantly. He can't say a word without admitting everything. No more respect for his wife than that, she thought. Every fat-faced little tomato who walks into his class. She took her drink back with her to the couch and picked up the history book she was studying. So, in my opinion, there could be all sorts of smaller talking points with this short story, but I think the one thing I really want to concentrate on is this, and give me a little bit of time because this is something that I kind of have to go through bit by bit, because I can tell you exactly what this short story is about, but if it's something that you haven't come to on your own, you haven't intuited, what this short story is kind of actually really about, or you don't. I think if you don't see this before I say the words in their order, I don't think you'll see it, because I don't think that it's something that's on the surface of this short story. This short story is about class and power. It may seem like it's about someone trying to make sure that her husband isn't cheating on her with college students. It may seem that way. But give me a moment here. When you have access to a thing, it loses its thrill. When a thing loses its thrill, you don't want to do it anymore. When it comes to something like sexuality, no one really wants to lose sexuality. Why? Nature has designed it that way. So, for attractive people, sex loses its thrill. For wealthy/powerful people, sex loses its thrill because it's ever available. It's always kind of there. So that's why you see things that are like in the news recently with the rapper guy getting himself in all the trouble with all of the weird types of relations. So you often hear of high-profile couples who are essentially in open relationships. It doesn't make sense to not be. Why have two people in an open relationship? Well, take, for example, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. I don't know if these are still people who are together. I understand that using them as the example dates myself. I am exceedingly old, but these two people, Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, have all the access in the world. But they would never find anyone else with the access, wealth, and attractiveness of the other. If you're Brad Pitt, you have to have someone like Angelina Jolie. If you're Angelina Jolie, you have to have someone like Brad Pitt. I don't mean to point to myself saying that, but you see what I'm getting at. It seems that way so that there is not an imbalance in the relationship. So what happens is both understand, because both of them could basically walk into any room in the world and sleep with whoever they wanted, right? Brad Pitt walks through that door, I'm busy for the next 15 minutes. Angelina Jolie walks through that door, I'm busy for the next 8.5 minutes. So because of that, the sex part does not become the linchpin of the relationship. For normal people, sex becomes sort of the linchpin of the relationship because it is the thing that you only trade with your partner. That does not have to be the case for super successful, super valuable, super rich, super attractive type people. Now, taking that into account, you're Angelina Jolie. Do you want to always be jealous? No, you don't. You're Brad Pitt. Do you want to always be jealous? Because you know whoever your partner is with when you aren't there will be trying to sleep with them. It doesn't make sense. So open up that portion of the relationship. Now, I'm sure there's some super irony there that they broke up because one of them cheated on the other or something. But so here's the thing. With that, though, who cares? You're Angelina Jolie, you're Brad Pitt. Who cares? It's just sex. The girls in this short story, they have summer houses. We talked about that. They talk about that in the short story. They have college educations, and they have ostensibly looks, right? But we'll kind of get back to that a little bit in a moment. The professor husbands in question in this short story, they have good jobs. They have prestige. That is a type of power. Um, you imagine they're paid well, but there's a line in here about Louise and her husband go to the movies when they can afford it. Not sure exactly what's going on there. There's a little bit of ambiguity in this short story overall. I don't know where they're at because Louise says in her country, and she's from the United States, and the girls say their parents will be in Europe. So I don't know where we are here. We're not in the United States. We're not in Europe. Anyway, so even though when they don't act on the advances, when the professor husbands don't act on the advances, they tell their wives about it. We have two stories in here: the Thorndike couple and Louise and her husband. The husbands are telling their wives. Why? Because it's not the most extreme thing in the world to them. They don't mind putting that detail out there because they don't seem too perplexed about it, because they have a position of prestige, whereas the wives in this short story do not. Now, those wives are not upper class like the girls are. The girls in this short story are upper class. They have vacation homes. They are in college. All of these things. But the wives are not. We get this from Louise herself. "It's not awfully warm," she said to Joan, mocking herself for saying warm instead of hot. "Who do I think I am?" she wondered. "Mrs. Astor? My brother sells insurance in New Jersey." So here she's reminding herself she's not upper class, she's not Mrs. Astor, and her brother sells insurance in New Jersey. These are things that combine to paint a middle class, lower middle class picture of Louise herself. And do you remember what I said about jealousy earlier? If you're Angelina Jolie, do you want to walk around being constantly jealous? No. So you drop that jealous bit. Why? Because if Brad Pitt's out there having sex with just anybody, so can you. You've opened things up. But in this short story, our wives in question do not have that luxury either. We get this. "It's very possible, for a girl this is Louise talking to the girls. It's very possible, for a girl your age to get herself into serious trouble. With the college, with her family. With his wife," Debbie said. "Bill Thorndike's wife was so jealous she couldn't see." Louise ran her finger softly along the design of the couch cushion. "I don't want to quarrel with you," she said. "Ellen Thorndike is worth the whole pack of you." But she was jealous, Debbie said. "Dusty told us she cried." "I could kill them," Louise thought. "I hardly think that Dusty is any competent judge of emotions," she said, hearing her voice go full of hatred. Because the wives in question in this short story seemingly feel that the girls have power or a station above them in life. The wives do not have access to the money. They're not the money makers in the relationship. And we'll get to that point in a moment. The wives, I need to put this out there because I'm saying this on the internet. This is not my opinion, okay? This is what you would hear in any given conversation, what you would hear stereotypically. These are not from me. This is from sort of society writ large, right? The wives do not have the prestige that the professor position has. They do not have the money that the professor / the rich girls do. They do not have the access that the university provides to both the students and the professors, access to powerful people in the university system. Nor do the wives in question have the quote-unquote looks? You are dealing with women in their 20s, 19, 18, 19, 20, 21. If you ask Siri or ChatGPT or Grok, what is a woman's prime? Not me. So just because it's on the internet doesn't mean you get mad at me. If you ask one of those things, what is a woman's prime? You're going to get an age prior to 25. Not my opinion. Not what I'm saying. Ask the internet. You'll get a number that is 25 or below. So the wives in question, above that number ostensibly. The college students in question are not. So the college girls have the money. They're from rich families. They have the status. They're in college and they're from well-to-do families. They have the access through the university to powerful people. So do the professors. And they have the looks. So when these girls approach their husbands, the women feel the power imbalance there. They feel they have to lash out. That is why the jealousy comes out. It is not anger, it is jealousy. It is the fear that something of theirs is being taken from them. So how do we know that the wives don't have jobs? So they might have jobs, they don't have status. Because, and this is one of the things that's very easy to miss if you're not just dialed in. During the end of this conversation, the girls say, Joan says to Luis, "It's because you don't have anything to do," Joan said. "Anything better, I mean." Basically saying that's why you're getting ticked off here, okay? Just because I'm flirting with your husband doesn't mean anything. Just because I'd probably, if I got the opportunity, doesn't mean anything. It's just the sex. It's just attention. And Joan replies, or Luis replies, "What do you have to do?" Luis asked. Now, she knows the girl, the college student, is rich. The college student is getting a college education. The college student is heading to summer. She doesn't have responsibilities. That doesn't mean that her time isn't valuable. But she's trying to dig that knife in. Meanwhile, in her own thoughts, "What do you have to do?" Luis asked. Ellen Thorndike was making a patchwork quilt. Jean Crown was growing orchids. Roberta Ewan had gone back to the piano. Suddenly, Luis was aware that she had said all she had to say, that any more talking would destroy the handsome invulnerability she had set up for herself with such care. And she shrugged, as perfectly as Joan had shrugged a few minutes ago. "Well," she said, "there's no point in our arguing about it. After all, you two are leaving tomorrow." Now, did Luis suddenly realize that she had no more to say? Or did Luis suddenly get in her feelings because she knows the girl is right? All of her friends, all of we're left to assume those are other professors' wives, all of them have turned to some type of hobby. Making quilts, growing orchids, any of this stuff, because they know they have to keep themselves busy. They have to pacify themselves, because there is, in this paragraph, we're also left to assume we know Luis's husband is being poached. Ellen Thorndike's husband, we know he's being poached. Jean Crown, her husband's being poached. Roberta Ewan, her husband's being poached. This is absolute madness. So this is a very mundane short story if you're not willing to do the work. But once you start to like say, hey, what's really going on there? This is a wild short story. Now, moving on to the writer's corner portion. It's a little bit easier on a second read, but that opening paragraph is rough. Come off it, kids, come off it, Louise Harlow told herself just under her breath. She smiled graciously at her husband, Lionel's, two best students, noticing with an edge of viciousness that they had both held their teacups exactly right, and said lightly, "You're going to have a pleasant time then?" There's so many commas so quick there that because we don't know the situation, the characters, the what does kids mean, how young are we talking here, then we get an introduction of the idea of summer. There's so much going on there. That is a very rough paragraph to open with. The next thing I want to talk about is dialogue. Great dialogue isn't about what a character says. Great dialogue is about what a character is thinking. Now, this is one of the things that Ernest Hemingway was an absolute master at. And I'm not saying that Shirley Jackson does it poorly here, but I want to read some part of this short story, and then I'll read it as if Hemingway wrote it. "It's not awfully warm," she said to Joan, mocking herself for saying warm instead of hot. "Who do I think I am?" she wondered. "Mrs. Astor. My brother sells insurance in New Jersey." "That doesn't matter," Joan said. She accepted the cup and set it down on the table next to her. It doesn't matter a damn, Louise thought, so she just won't drink it. "So," Louise said, leaning back against the couch cushions. "So," Debbie said. She and Joan looked at each other again, almost experimentally. Louise watched. "You still making passes at my husband?" Louise asked deliberately. Of Joan, who was gratified to see them both blush. "Well," she said. "Look, Mrs. Harlow," Joan said with a mild little laugh, "you know perfectly well." That's very dynamic, right? But it doesn't trust the reader. Let me read this as if Hemingway wrote it. Hemingway, who probably trusted readers too much. "It's not awfully warm," she said to Joan, mocking herself for saying warm instead of hot. "Who do I think I am? Mrs. Astor? My brother sells insurance in New Jersey." "That doesn't matter," Joan said. "So," Louise said. "So," Debbie said. "You still making passes at my husband?" "Well." "Look, Mrs. Harlow, you know perfectly well. I do indeed." Hemingway really let the dialogue speak for itself, because what you're doing when you allow the dialogue to speak for itself is you're actually telling us what the characters are thinking without telling us what the characters are thinking. "So," Louise said. "So," Debbie said. "You still making passes at my husband?" Stop. Right there. We can add all the rest. We can add everything else in. We don't need Louise asked deliberately of Joan and was gratified to see both of them blush. We don't need it. We are slapped in the face by that transition there, and it is glorious. So I think that Shirley Jackson does a whole lot with inner dialogues better than Ernest Hemingway did. But I wish that she would let her inner monologues. Shirley Jackson did inner monologues way better than Hemingway, but I wish she would have let her dialogue breathe the way that Hemingway let his dialogue breathe. Now, the next thing I want to talk about here, emotional complexity. That makes a story dynamic. Louise is sitting here. She knows about the girls. She's trying to put on a face, and she knows that the girls know she knows. Right? That's 3 levels right there. You add, and that's just the interaction part of this. You add in that she's angry with the girls. You add in that she's angry with her husband. You add in that she is afraid she's going to end up like that list of women she lists at the end with the orchids and the patchwork, etc. You add all of that in, and that's just her side. Then you have the girls who want her husband. They know she knows they want her husband, or one of them wants her husband. They have this little group with whom they are doing this thing. So they must have some pride in it, right? The pride of cuckoldry, the pride of being the bull, if we're allowed to use those terms, I don't know. You have the fact that both of them, all three of them, I guess you would say, have to be a little bit scared at this transaction, right? Then you add in at the end, the Luis feels relieved, but does she really? That is a strange type of relief, right? So there are a lot of emotions going on in this short story, and that makes for very dynamic reading. But what you risk is disengaging your reader. See, there are so many things going on so fast here that you risk disengaging your reader because they don't know what emotion they're supposed to feel. When you don't know what emotion you're supposed to feel, it's easy to get confused and think that a short story sucks. Right? Because you don't know where you are emotionally. I think that Jackson pulls it off miraculously, but it's easy to feel that way. And the last thing I want to talk about here, page 17 in this copy. I do indeed, Louise said. She waited again, still watching. The girls were tense, but not as tense as she was. They showed it more because they were younger and unprepared, and all of their training had not taught them what to do when they were attacked, because none of their training had ever anticipated they might be exposed for anything, anywhere, at any time. Remember when I went on that rant about how I wish she would let the dialogue speak for itself? That's an exception. That paragraph is incredible. The power dynamic going on there, the fact that basically that's the moment in the short story where Luis is saying, look, I don't have the money, I don't have the looks, I don't have the prestige, I don't have the class, I don't have the power. You don't know what I'm going to do. You don't know where I'm willing to take this, right? You don't know that I will go upside your head. That's the moment where Luis really not just Luis, that's the moment where everyone present knows that the tension here can get ratcheted up. But she is in control. That's all I have for this short story discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more literary discussions in the future. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.